My neighbor was stealing water from my house, so I ruined him. Our storyteller had just bought a new home in the middle of a bustling capital city in Asia. It was a fixer-upper, a place he got for a great price from family friends who'd been living abroad for years. The house had been left empty, mid-renovation, for nearly 3 years. The front door was secured with nothing more than a simple padlock. There wasn't even a gate. Anyone could just walk right onto the property. And as he would soon find out, someone had been doing exactly that. He thought he was just dealing with a minor annoyance. He had no idea he was about to uncover a secret that would lead him to destroy his neighbor's life with the simple turn of a tap. The very first day he moved in, he found a stranger's bike parked in his garage. He just rolled it out onto the street and immediately had a proper gate installed. Later that day, an angry man was banging on his new gate. Through the window, he watched the man shout for about 15 minutes before finally giving up, grabbing his bike, and storming off. So, first impressions of the neighborhood? Not great. But after that, things quieted down. He put up a "no parking" sign, and the issue of people blocking his gate mostly went away. He thought the worst was over. Then, last week, he was in the shower. And he noticed something strange. The water pressure was low. Way lower than usual. At that exact moment, he heard it. A low hum from next door. It was his neighbor's water pump. Now, this neighbor was an old guy who lived in a 3-story house right next to his. He lived on the ground floor and rented out the top 2 floors to tenants. This was the same angry man from the bike incident. The previous owners had warned him about this guy. He'd been furious that the house was sold, complaining to them endlessly. But our storyteller is a big guy, 6 feet tall with 3 dogs. He wasn't worried. In this city, the public water supply doesn't have enough pressure to reach the top floors of a tall building. So, houses like his neighbor's have a pump that pushes the water up to a large storage tank on the roof. Hearing that pump kick on right as his own water pressure dropped, it felt like more than a coincidence. He got suspicious. He waited. A few minutes later, the humming from next door stopped. He turned on a few taps in his own house. And just like that, the pressure was back to normal. Strong and steady. The pieces started clicking into place. For the past 3 years, while the house was empty, the water bills had been mysteriously high. The old owners had chalked it up to some leaky pipes they never got around to fixing. But the cost was always a little too high for just a few drips. Now, it was all starting to make a terrifying kind of sense. At some point in the last 3 years, this entitled old man decided he didn't want to pay for water anymore. He must have waltzed onto the empty property, tapped into the main water line, and started siphoning water for his entire 3-story building, tenants and all. All on someone else's dime. He spent the next few days thinking, what was the right move here? Confront him? Call the authorities? Just let it go? After all, water is incredibly cheap in his country. His total monthly bill, even with the neighbor stealing from him, was only about $5. But this wasn't about $5. It was about the principle. It was about the audacity of an entitled person who believed he had the right to take what wasn't his, simply because he could. It was theft, plain and simple. And he decided this old man needed to learn a lesson he would never forget. Here's where the story takes a turn. His plan was brutally simple. He wouldn't have to break any laws. He wouldn't even have to speak to the man. He was just going to wait. So on Monday, he kept an ear out. He waited until he heard that familiar low hum start up from next door, the sound of the neighbor's pump kicking on, pulling water from his supply line. And then he walked outside to his main water valve, and he turned it off. Now, you have to understand how these water pumps work. Inside the rooftop tank, there's a little float, like the one in your toilet. When the water level drops, the float drops, which sends an electrical signal to the pump, telling it to turn on. The pump stays on, pushing water up, until the tank is full and the float rises, shutting it off. But now, there was no water coming. The pump was on, but it was starving. It was trying to pull water from a dry pipe. And anyone who knows anything about motors knows that running a pump dry is the fastest way to destroy it. His plan was to simply burn out the motor and cause a major headache for his neighbor and his tenants. But he didn't account for one critical detail. The neighbor's house was old. The wiring was ancient, probably from the 90s. A modern house would have breakers that would trip. This house did not. So the pump stayed on. And on. And on. All night long, it was trying to draw power, straining against a task it could never complete. At around 3 a.m., he was woken up by shouting. He looked out his window and saw lights flickering on and off next door. The tenants were all awake, yelling at their landlord. The constant power draw from the dying pump hadn't just burned itself out. It had overloaded the ancient electrical system and fried the wiring for the entire building. They had no water. And now, they had no power either. In this country, tenant protection laws are taken very seriously. Water and power are essential services. A landlord cannot legally cut them off. The tenants, furious and left in the dark, called the police. Because the landlord is responsible for maintaining the house's wiring and plumbing, he was found to be in clear violation of the law. The police have the authority to issue fines on the spot for breaches like this. The fallout was catastrophic. The landlord was hit with a $500 fine, a huge amount of money there. He was ordered to refund the security deposits for both of his tenants. And he was legally forbidden from renting out the apartments again until the entire property's plumbing and electrical systems were brought up to code. An impossibly expensive task. One of the tenants moved out 2 days later. The other followed shortly after. Just like that, his only source of income was gone. He was a retired mechanic with no other way to make money. The house was his entire livelihood. And now it was a useless, powerless, waterless shell. A few days later, the old man came to his gate. He looked tired, defeated. He asked, "Did you turn off your water the other night?" Our storyteller just looked at him calmly. "Oh, yeah," he said. "My main tank sprang a new leak on one of the pipes. I had to turn it off overnight until the plumber could come by the next day to fix it." Terrible timing, huh? The look on the old man's face. It was a mask of stone, but underneath, you could just see the churning rage. He knew. He absolutely knew what had happened. But he couldn't prove a thing. All he could say was, "Oh. Okay." And he turned around and walked back to his dark, empty house. As of today, the neighbor is moving out this Sunday. He's going to live with his daughter. He lost everything. He lost his tenants, his income, and now his home. And our storyteller? He's getting a plumber to come next week to remove any pipes that lead off his property for good. He got rid of a water thief and a nightmare neighbor, all by flicking a single switch. The revenge was perfect, but it cost an old man his entire life. Was this a clever lesson in consequences, or did he go way too far?